Welcome to Arrows on Air, presented by Tomorrow's Air. I'm Christina Beckman, and this is a show about the other sides of climate action. Here we learn from the fascinating experiences of adventurers, artists, storytellers, and scientists who help show us not only the how of climate action, but also why it's worth the effort. Hello and welcome. In this latest episode of Arrows on Air, I'm chatting with Court Whelan. And don't worry, I've gotten this cold since we recorded the conversation, so you only have to listen to my hoarse voice for this little opener. Let me first give you some background on Court. Nature has been a constant in his life, spending much of his youth outdoors. His strong love and appreciation for wildlife led him to attend the University of Florida, where he received his bachelor's, master's, and PhD degrees in both ecotourism and entomology. As the creator of his own discipline and major, Court was able to design his coursework, research, and teaching to focus on, as he puts it, conserving the world through nature and educational travel experiences. Throughout his graduate school career, Court also ran an ecotourism company through which he planned and led more than 60 expeditions to nature destinations on all 7 continents. Today, Court continues to guide the world's best nature expeditions with Natural Habitat Adventures and World Wildlife Fund, while also heading up NatHab's sustainability efforts, elevating it to become one of the most sustainable and eco-conscious travel enterprises in the world. From ensuring complete carbon neutrality to guiding the world's first zero-waste adventure, improving the world via travel is at the center of Court's career. Throughout his travels, he has also developed a keen sense for photography and videography, whether it's an expedition to the Arctic for polar bears and northern lights, to Africa for the world's most charismatic megafauna, or deep into the remote jungles of Borneo, Madagascar, and Papua New Guinea. Court cherishes his time teaching and extending his love of conservation photography to anyone eager to learn. In this conversation, we start by looking at the connection between biodiversity and climate. I really love Court's description of why biodiversity matters for us. He uses the metaphor of a software backup, which I think is great for those of us who spend a lot of time at a desk, to help understand the importance of biodiversity. He also offers some really good advice for people who want to be sustainable but maybe feel overwhelmed by thinking of where to start. I hope you listen to the end to find out also about his musical interests. Court is not only a conservationist, he's also a musician and a chef. So I really hope you enjoy this conversation. So Court, I'm so happy to have you on this show. One of the things that I've been really interested to explore, because you are one of the rare nature guides who's also a PhD in, I think, ecology and sustainable tourism.
Yeah. So I consider myself an ologist.
Uh-huh.
Probably most of the time I self-ID as a conservation biologist, but my degrees, my PhD was in ecotourism and entomology, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Entomology being study of insects. But really it was my way of learning about kind of all of life, because one thing I've found is that pretty much everything either eats or is eaten by insects. So as a result, you kind of enter the food web and get to learn about the natural world from a unique angle.
And I think from a non-specialist perspective, I can sort of see that climate change damages biodiversity, but there's more to the climate change and biodiversity link, I think, right? Like biodiversity is also a solution or can help us with climate change. Let's start the conversation there at the link between climate and biodiversity.
Absolutely. Biodiversity is it. It's the name of the game. It's what every conservation biologist is hyper focused on, even if they're coming at it from different angles. Biodiversity is the thing that's going to preserve and save our world, really. Biodiversity being short for biological diversity, and it's essentially the variety of life on Earth, and that's from every living organism in all 5 kingdoms, including mushrooms and plants and animals and bacteria and all that. But it also talks about and refers to the genetic diversity, so like the diversity within individual species. So it's just like that whole thing is biodiversity. It's a big umbrella. And biodiversity is it's wildly important, and I'm trying a metaphor on for size here. It's not quite polished, but we'll see how it goes. It's biodiversity, like the benefit of such is kind of akin to like part hard drive backup and part software update. And bear with me here, but the idea is that, where we're at in the history of life on Earth, we're 4.7 billion years into this rock being formed, and we're about, let's say, 1.5 billion years into life as we know it, more or less 500 million years into kind of modern recognizable life. And every moment, species are updating, from a genetic standpoint, from an evolution standpoint. And it's been a lot of moments for the last 1.5 billion years, billion with a B. And so you have just software update after software update after software update. So if we start selectively or unselectively taking out species from this biological diversity of our world at randomness, meaning like the natural world is not forcing these things out of existence, but sort of the unnatural world, the changes that we've imposed upon it, it's like we could be deleting the latest update of Windows, and we need to operate our whole world on Windows 95 because the latest species are no longer around. We have to rely on other things. And this is, this goes across all species out there. It could just be any number of individual species that gets deleted from the world because of the things that are happening that we unfortunately are contributing to a lot. And so again, this idea of software update is like the world's not going to be able to run on antiquated species alone. Like this evolution is what has got us and supported where we are. And that kind of speaks also to the hard drive backup angle of it, is that when you have, multiple species occupying a single like role in the ecosystem, whether it might be helping filter water, like how some grasses and plants do, or whether it might be fixing nitrogen in the soil so plants can grow, like many species of bacteria do, whether it is, the what we call the detritivores, the things that decompose trees, or even bigger mammals that have huge impacts in the ecosystem. When you have multiple like backups, like let's say 8 species all do a very, very similar thing, if you lose one or two to, we call it, this is a fancy word, but a stochastic event, like a random event in nature, like a hurricane or an earthquake or a volcano or whatever, things that have been happening since the dawn of time that have just always been part of the world. The world's a pretty violent, chaotic place. If you lose a couple of species, at least there are 6 other things. I'm just using random numbers here. There's not actually like 8 backups of every species, but there's 8 or maybe 800 backups. So like when those things inevitably are removed and go extinct, there are other things that step up to the plate, step up to the task, and still can break down trees and still fix nitrogen in the soil and still regulate herds of wildebeest across the Serengeti like lions do, etc. So anyway, kind of a obscure metaphor, but biodiversity is crazy important for those reasons, is that we've spent a lot of time evolving to get to where we are. And if we start taking out pieces of that chain, the chain of anything is only as strong as the weakest link. So we have some issues there. And also just the backup issue. Like if we remove every single thing that decomposes trees from the earth, oh my God, like, can you imagine where we would be living? It'd be a nightmare. It'd be inhabitable. So anyway, that's a long kind of setup for some of the context of why biodiversity is important. I could throw out a bunch of other kind of little fun facts and tidbits, but one I'll start with is that, back in 2001, a pretty big study was done on the valuation of biodiversity and of like ecosystem processes. And at that time, this is 2001, so over 20 years ago, they put the value of the world's biological diversity that govern the biological processes, like clean air, clean water, soil nutrients, like all the really big things that we don't really think about that much. They valued it at $30 trillion. This is like several times over, like multiple than the entire world's gross domestic product. And that's, this is like 20 years ago. So, let's stick $60 trillion on it now. I would see that being a pretty realistic number. So then, the bigger thing is like, if we have to start doing all this stuff that nature just does automatically, what's it going to cost us? $30 trillion or $60 trillion in today's money, probably. So anyway, biodiversity, super important. It's kind of the core of everything. The way it's connected to climate is, climate is going to more or less affect two main things. A changing climate is going to affect two main things in our world. One is it's going to be the more or less, like, we'll just call it the weather, like the climate itself, like ranging from temperatures to ocean currents to precipitation cycles to hurricanes and all sorts of stuff, like just the weather around us. And that's not good, right? Because we've already seen like some of the worst fires in history, some of the worst hurricanes in history, just some of the worst heat waves in history that affect all life on Earth they're staggering. They're really, really bad. But then the other thing that climate's going to affect is biological diversity. And biological diversity is this engine that really is it's like there are two engines in one car. Like one of it is the engine that runs the Earth is like the climate, the predictable cycles of rainfall and temperature and daylight and all that. But the other engine is the life that moderates itself and moderates other life. And so when climate changes, all the obvious things, it's going to get warmer. We're going to have more violent storms. We're going to have very asynchronous rain patterns, but we're also going to probably lose a lot of biodiversity. And if great biodiversity is a really good thing, very poor biodiversity is a very bad thing. So that's kind of the long and the short of it is, as the climate changes, it's going to put us all in even more jeopardy, probably in a way that not a lot of us are thinking. I'd say the average person is thinking about the bad hurricanes, the bad fires, but they're not thinking about losing pollinators, because as the climate changes, insects and birds and pollinators are going to fly to cool down. They're going to go towards the poles to buffer that temperature. But the plants that they pollinate, are they going to be able to fly? Well, maybe over the course of 100 years, they'll gradually pollinate more towards the poles, like they fly via their next generations. But so you have this incredible asynchrony. That's just one of many, many examples of how biodiversity is going to be affected in a really, really strongly pronounced way. So yeah, it's very concerning, because without biodiversity, again, we just open ourselves up to this really kind of horrific feedback cycle of worsening conditions that goes all the way, to our food cycle and our agriculture, et cetera, et cetera. Like everything will be impacted, unfortunately.
I like the software analogy, actually, Court.
Okay, good.
I was tracking with that. I mean, right, the world cannot run on antiquated species alone. I think we don't think about the services that are provided by biodiversity as, you're right, it's not as front and center when we think of climate impacts. And also, it occurs to me that we don't even know all the services provided by biodiversity. Like it seems to me that we're constantly uncovering some interdependency relationship in nature, that we're continually being surprised by the various ways that one one aspect of biodiversity is connected to another. The way trees can communicate with each other, and the way, I don't even have great examples because obviously I'm not a scientist, but that is my general feeling, is like anytime we tamper with one aspect of the natural world, we find it's connected to 17 other aspects that we didn't think about.
Oh, it's like cracking a whip, with a small motion of your arm, it creates this undulating ripple effect that
Mm.
when the whip runs out, it ends with a big bang and a big snap. I mean, that's essentially what's happening, is like small changes, because of the tremendous interconnectivity of nature, by its own design. It has this amplified effect at the ends. And as you said, we don't really even know where the ends are, the sort of metaphorical ends. I mean, we probably have discovered realistically 10% of species on Earth. I mean, there's an estimate that there's, even just insects alone, we've discovered about 1 million species, and we believe there's probably about 29 million species left to discover. So considering that every species has a connection with something else, and probably hundreds of connections, the fact that we don't know about even the existence of those individuals or those species, you can only imagine how little we truly know in the grand scheme of things. It's exciting as a scientist, but it's also frightening when we're facing down some catastrophes.
I feel like we should be sitting in a college dorm room right now, late at night, with tapestries on the walls, just being mind blown
I
about.
know, man.
My mind is so blown. Well, you just got back, speaking of mind blown, from a trip to Greenland, I think, right? You were on the Greenland ice sheet, you were in Iceland, you flew over the volcano. Tell us what those experiences got you thinking about when it comes to climate and our solutions.
Oh, it was extraordinary in so many ways. So yeah, I mean, to pair Iceland and Greenland together, it was wild. Starting off with seeing this land of fire and ice that I have been to many times before, and I even guide there in the summers from time to time. I always look at Iceland as this rare, unique glimpse of how the Earth began, because it began that way. It began with fire out of the ocean creating land. It went through 5 to 6 different ice ages that created glaciers on top of volcanoes that would then melt in, astonishingly vast quantities of water pouring down the canyons and carving things very, very quickly. And, being over this big volcanic hotspot. So like, it was really cool to, kind of in line with the talk of biodiversity and sort of origins of Earth. Iceland is that place. You can kind of go into a time machine and see what the Earth probably looked like at various early stages. And then Greenland, contrasting, it's really quite different. Iceland seems to be like this young, violent type of island, whereas Greenland is sort of this old, weathered landscape. It's most famous for having this huge ice sheet on top, which is like millions of square miles. Um, but the impression of being in Greenland, I mean, first of all, it's just awestruck with beauty. It's my first time there this past summer. But I'd say probably the most pivotal moment was when I got on top of that ice sheet and really looked out into all directions of this what is like a mile or two thick of ice in many, many places. And to be honest, it actually in some ways gave me hope about climate change, which is maybe odd to hear or ironic, but it was so vast, it was so endless, and it's also ground zero for climate change up there, right? Like we may all know that the poles are experiencing the most drastic temperature swings. Those at the equator are currently least affected through the feedback cycles and through the interconnectivity of weather patterns and all that. Like they're not exempt for when things really go down. But right now, people in Greenland, they've been dealing with climate change for a couple of decades, multiple decades, and they told us stories of what it used to be like and what it is now. And in some ways, it's interesting because the climate change will not impact everybody equally. In dense population centers, you have a whole different thing where there's going to be climate catastrophes and climate refugees in highly populated countries or regions of the world. You go to Greenland, and surprisingly, I mean, they're in some ways just adapting and rolling with the punches and saying, "Oh, yeah, it's a little bit harder to predict the weather, but at least we get to fish and hunt year round." And obviously, I'm hyper concerned with climate change, just like anybody else is. But it was refreshing to hear an alternative perspective. Granted, that's only 57,000 people in the world that might feel that way in a mildly positive sense, but nevertheless refreshing. But being on top of that Greenland ice sheet, it was kind of like, we talk about the time is now. We talk about whether we are too late. We talk about we're not too late to do something about it. And looking at this big air conditioning system in the north, more or less, this huge sheet of ice that is still to this day regulating our climate so much, it did make me, visually see the positive side. Like, hey, there's something still left. Like there is time before this thing melts entirely. And I think when I'm like an anti doom and gloom guy, but I'm very aware of it. And when you look at like the stories or the photos or the videos of climate change, a topic that's obviously super near and dear to my heart, any sort of media or any sort of visual representation is usually the bad stuff, right? It's like the catastrophes, it's the worsening hurricanes, it's the you name it. But there almost is no other picture that comes to mind of like like any sort of positivity left, or like the hope of us being able to tackle this, because the hope really is just that nothing will change. And it's, what sort of photo do you take of nothing changing, right? But then being on top of that ice sheet, it was like that photo I've been finally waiting for, of like, oh wait, there's this is what we're saving, like sort of literally and
Mm.
metaphorically. So it was a really profound moment to have some strong hope in the whole fight, to say all the things that we're doing, we're leading to something. We're making sacrifices today to hope that the future generations have it better, and that might once again be ground zero, and this wonderful symbol, visual symbol that I got to physically stand on and eat snow from.
Mhm. I agree with that too. I think it's not very motivating to be to be told that we're too late. And things are changing. I have been to Greenland, and I've also been in conference sessions with Greenlanders. I'm thinking of something like in 2008, and the folks from Greenland were much more sanguine about changes to their environment. Even the presenters were like, the way of life for the people of Greenland will dramatically change. And there was a guy from Greenland who was like, well, hasn't it always been dramatically changing for my
Mm-hmm.
people? And so, yes, and of course, our cultural traditions and all this, yes, it's changing, and there's loss associated with that and pain. And also, we are able to figure it out. So, I can imagine that very well for you. So you are also, you mentioned, a nature guide. You work at Natural Habitat Adventures and you lead trips in partnership, I think, with the World Wildlife Fund, or
Mm-hmm.
you're very linked with WWF, which is obviously very focused on conservation. So, what happens on a Natural Habitat Adventures WWF trip from a conservation education perspective? And what do you hear from guests? In my mind, these guests are, you know, affluent, well educated people who want to learn and who possibly go back home with some newfound passion for conservation. Tell us a little bit about the trips.
Yeah, that's very much what we hope for, is that these influencers of our world, so to speak, will go home with new ideas, profound realizations, inspiration, and a love of our natural world. I often quote Aldo Leopold here, in that you cannot save what you do not love, and you cannot love what you do not know. And so I view our work as getting people to really know things that they might not otherwise be able to know and see and experience, whether it's a pack of African wild dogs in Botswana, or looking into the eyes of a polar bear in Churchill, Canada. These are things that are hard to see, hard to get to, hard to understand. And so, where the connection between conservation and travel works for us, and where we facilitate it, employ it on our trips, in a number of different ways. There's the first, and kind of the most obvious, is just the value of travel to conservation, and that's something that we certainly do talk about, but we're kind of living and breathing it as well. We're all experiencing on these trips, and it really comes down to the root of why we look at ecotourism, aka conservation travel, as one of the world's greatest conservation tools. Remember, I started as a conservation biologist, and I view tourism, or I viewed tourism as such a huge opportunity that I really pursued this as my conservation tool. Is it comes down to being able to add value to natural ecosystems and wildlife. Everything in life has a value, whether you like it or not. A forest is valued for its timber or it's valued for the wildlife that it holds. And more than ever, we are seeing that the value of these places, of the wildlife, of the trees, of the ecosystems, of the regions in general, from a nature perspective, is worth like multiple times more alive and well than dead or degraded. Like, sometimes 5 times as much, sometimes 500, sometimes 5,000 times much more money. And, it's not all about money, but it is about healthcare. It's about education. It's about progress. It's about putting food on the table. And that's what the money does in these places. So that's like the biggest thing in my mind. And what's so cool about it is that if we did nothing else, that whole engine is running, at a really efficient, high rate around the world. But, conservation is very much in our blood at NatHab, within staff members and expedition leaders and everybody, and throughout the office, throughout leadership. And so we go beyond that, like beyond just the idea of leaving money in local economies, which is fantastic. And again, a huge, huge part of the equation. We can do more. And so the other part of that is really changing the lives of the guests that we take on trips. And very often, whether people are well traveled or affluent or not, or anything in between, these are these trips and these experiences are what people live for. I mean, the idea of going to watch a million monarch butterflies burst off of fir trees in the highlands of Mexico, it was like a dream a couple decades ago. It wasn't even believed to be something you could see. It's something only you could see on the Discovery Channel or Nat Geo magazines. Like that was it. Like people don't go there. And same thing with watching polar bears roam the tundra or sitting with mountain gorillas. So it's a huge, meaningful, I think, turning point in a lot of people's lives to realize that the world has so much left for the saving, so many reasons to save it, so many reasons to protect every bit of life, the biodiversity, the network of life. You can't save the lions and the elephants without saving the dung beetles and the naked mole rats. Like they're all part of this system, very interconnected. So yeah, I think by just showing people the stuff that we all like to see, it gets them thinking about what they want to save and what they want to love. And I often get the question as a guide, okay, great, we're on this ultra sustainable trip, but I'm going home in a week, and how do I keep being conservation minded or sustainable? And I really break it down into a pretty simple explanation. Like, do what you do best and do it for conservation. Because the thing is, like, a lot of people think that, well, the only thing we can do is donate money to an organization to save the world. Like that's all we can do. It's like, well, that's a great thing to do if you have had a successful career and that's what you do best, and you have finances and you have that, great, that's what you do best. Like, you contribute it. But there are a lot of people that might be a really good writer. Start an online article or blog or contribute to a local newspaper and talk about your experiences. Some people may be really great at hosting dinner parties. Great. Have your friends over and tell them about the experiences and show them photos and slides and talk about the lessons learned from the trip and inspire them to either go see it themselves or to at least care about it. Again, you cannot save what you do not love, like spreading that love. People may be great photographers and might be starting their own website or gallery or contributing to a local library or simply posting on social media and talking about the amazing things that they've seen and spreading that awareness, that connection and that love. So yeah, you do what you do best. Maybe you're really good at activism and you really enjoy leading that charge. Not everybody's good at everything. Not everybody wants to do everything. But if you do what you do best, you're gonna have more passion for it because you're better at it. And then because you're better at it, you're going to do more of it, and you're going to do more of it and then get better at it and have more passion for it. So it's this lovely cycle that if you start doing stuff that you're just not suited to do or doesn't resonate with you, it's just, it'll be it'll be a flash in the pan when you get back from these trips, but it won't last. So I always say, do what you do best and do it for conservation. Find a way to weave in the conservation with those efforts. And then the other part of how conservation is tied in with the trips is the actual lessons and the learning. So it's not just seeing the critters and seeing all the good stuff, but it's learning the plight. It's learning the risks. It's learning the issues. It's learning the opportunities. It's learning about some of the research that was taking place. It's learning about the rehabilitation centers. It's learning about all the science that kind of has been done before you, to bring it to this point of knowledge and awareness that we can actually go sit with gorillas peacefully, or go sit next to a leopard and have the awareness to talk about it, to learn about it, and to coexist peacefully with it. So yeah, there's a lot of teaching, a lot of lessons on the trip. I think it's all woven together very nice, in the sense that you're inspired, you're informed, you're educated, you're influenced, and you're also creating and adding value to the very places that you have now formed this bond with, that will likely contribute to saving them forever. Because again, if things are most valued because of their timber or because of their hides, their pelts, if that's their most value, you know what direction that's going to go. And we don't want it to go that direction. We want the value to be in the tourism infrastructure, and it's working.
Mm. I also know I just came back from a meeting where I was sharing the stage with one of your colleagues, Ted Martins, and he was talking about the great lengths that you go to at Natural Habitat Adventures to run a sustainable business. So recognizing, people who aren't in sort of the nature ecotourism professional world, initially, some of them will have the sense of travel as being not good for the world, and really just rich people having great experiences at the expense of everybody else, because tourism is so destructive. And I think there's a lot of education to be done around that good good tourism is out there and is worth supporting. And Ted was sharing about all of the things that you do in your company. Maybe are you in a spot to talk any about the electric vehicles, and also like the zero waste? I know you guys tried to, or did,
Mm-hmm.
pilot test a zero waste trip. Maybe talk a little bit about the operational efforts that you've been working on at your company to make travel sustainable.
Yeah, my pleasure. It's very much under my purview. So yeah, let's start with since we're kind of already diving into the topic of carbon and climate, let's talk about decarbonization. So
Hmm.
yeah, we it's, on the other side of the equation, there's the offsetting, which we've been doing for quite some time. We're actually the world's first 100% carbon neutral travel company from back in 2007, but the reality is that's not going to be enough in the end for the long game. So decarbonization is a big thing. It's a really challenging thing in the tourism industry, not because we can't come up with innovation, but it's mainly because of where the carbon comes from, and the fact that there are a lot of players involved, and the average company owns a small slice of the overall pie. Like, even if you're a tour operator that is completely self-operated, and you own every lodge, and you own every vehicle, and you directly hire every guide, and you own every restaurant, and you own the park that you're in, you own the airline, you own the in-country bushcraft. Like, first of all, nobody does that. But even if you did, it's to be very, very difficult. But the fact that there are so many players involved, that it really comes down to each individual part and each individual company needing to take ownership over their own slice. Um, but that hasn't been happening quite fast enough for our likes. So we've taken a lot of it into our own hands, and this is where some of these really cool innovations come together, like the electric safari vehicles that we're rolling out. So yeah, I'll just kind of cut to the chase there. So the electric safari vehicle concept was something, we were not the first to do it, but we were among the first. It was still pretty early on when we started rolling this thing out in 2021. I'll be honest, it took a couple of years to get it to a working order and to get the whole thing planned, because per NatHab tradition, we swung for the fences and tried to make the biggest impact possible. So not only did we want to turn a diesel vehicle into an electric vehicle, we wanted to do it in remote Botswana, and we wanted to do it at an off-grid safari camp in an area that has a whole lot of sand, a good bit of water, and the needs for a kind of a perfect vehicle that is high powered, that can drive fast enough, that can last long enough. So we really went big for our first one. But again, it was intentional, because if we could do that and do it there and do it in that style, we could do it in most other places. Like, that was the experiment. So yeah, it is in the field. It's operational in Botswana. It is accompanied with a 15 kilowatt solar array at the Gamodi camp, Nathab Gamodi camp, and it's pretty extraordinary. It's this thing that is whisper quiet in the landscape. It's a different safari going experience because the guide can have a quiet conversation with guests as they're driving at almost top speed because you don't have this engine and the gears and the motor and the rumbling. So it's really quite exciting. We kind of learned our lesson of swinging for the fences and thinking, well, as we expand this, let's indeed think about how we can do it anywhere, and let's look at other places. So we're currently rolling out more electric vehicles in East Africa, and we have electric vehicles rolling out in our U.S. national park trips.
And it's a lot of commitment there too, because Ted was explaining like it's not like you buy this vehicle and plug it in and it works perfectly and everything's perfect. Sometimes it gets stuck in the mud. Sometimes, I mean, it sounds like you've been through some iterations there. So I think from a company perspective, it's very commendable and to recognize the investment and the commitment that keeps you working on it, right?
Totally. Yeah. I mean, that's the thing, is that this is still a rough and tumble bush vehicle. Um, and I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges, is that for a typical engine, a typical motor, a diesel engine, there are a lot of people that know how to work on those things. And the way that the differentials work for the gears and the tires and all-wheel drive, it's pretty traditional. But then as soon as you start electrifying the thing, everything changes markedly. And I'm not a mechanic or an engineer whatsoever, but I know it's different enough that it takes a whole nother level of training and education and information to get folks up to speed. So like that's kind of an exciting part of all this, is that in conjunction with rolling out these vehicles, we're also helping train local folks in these areas, camp managers and folks from villages, to understand how to maintain a 15 kilowatt solar array in the more or less Kalahari Desert. So it's really cool. It's teaching these new skills to folks and helping them come along and propel the industry into these new heights and new areas as it pertains to decarbonization, which is a really really important thing. I often say I don't think the technology exists quite there yet. It's not like we can just go out and put an order in for 12 of these new vehicles. Like we kind of have to find the right company and find the right vehicle that can be converted, and work with them on step-by-step processes. And like we're pushing it along faster than the electrification industry is moving. So it's we're very much at the vanguard. Sometimes it's scary, sometimes it's energizing.
I think, well, we're cheering you on. So for the average traveler who may or may not be conscious of all the leverage that they have in terms of decisions they can make to be a climate conscious traveler, what recommendations do you have? Like I know if I travel with NatHab, you all are doing the utmost to try and have the most environmentally conscientious trip that's possible. So I kind of don't necessarily have to think about it all when I travel with you. But for the average traveler who maybe isn't taking all their trips with NatHab, do you have any recommendations for how or what kind of questions to ask when you're planning a trip or things to think about when you're putting your itinerary together? Maybe you're somebody who doesn't even want to hire many guides. What's the best way to be climate conscious when you're traveling?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'm going to start off with a bit more on like the mindset. Something is better than nothing, and a lot is better than a little. I really do my best to not villainize the unsustainable, because of the philosophy of it all. So we have sustainability as like this scale or this spectrum. And you have on one end like zero unsustainable, and on the other hand you have ultra sustainable. But the challenge is that there's a lot of middle ground, and even on the far end of sustainable, like there's always more you can do. So I'm very careful to not discourage people from doing a little, because a little is still better than nothing. So even if you can't make every single part of your trip wonderfully sustainable, doing something is better than nothing. So I really encourage folks just to use their common sense, do the thinking, do the research, and probably more than anything, start asking questions of businesses. I think if you, to just make a really easy in with all this, if you're a traveler and let's say you're planning a week long trip to, I don't know, let's say Italy. I don't know. It's a popular destination. Isn't it like the number one tourist destination in the world? Something like that.
Right.
Not exactly what we do here at NatHab, but it's an example. So, yeah, a week long trip there. If you were to say, I'm going to ask 3 people that I book with about their position on sustainability, 3, that's it.
Like your hotelier, your bus driver.
Your hotel, your maybe even like your airline, maybe the transfer driver, maybe the activity you booked, a little cute boat ride in the city, that sort of stuff. And just set a number, like do 3. Don't overwhelm yourself. So this is again where it's like you could always be doing more. So exhausting yourself and turning yourself off of sustainability because it's too much work and not enough return, not enough reward, is kind of the enemy. Like the enemy here is apathy. Like
We're turning your trip into homework. I think sometimes sustainable travel people will get very preachy, and suddenly this vacation I've been saving up for where I'm going to recharge and connect with my family is like this massive emissions measurement homework project that it's not fun anymore. Now I don't even want to go on holiday. So I feel like there's got to be a happy medium. I like what you're saying.
Exactly. And again, if you were to look at this, like the enemy here, the worst thing you can be doing is being apathetic about sustainability. You don't have to care as much as the Dalai Lama or anything, but I don't know, he's probably pretty sustainable. You don't, you don't have to be like the most caring person about it, but you have to care something and a little bit. And so it kind of reminds me of, the zero waste adventure that we planned and ran in 2019. Short answer, we did it. We actually made it zero waste. And we had, it was 12 travelers, 6 days, 4 hotels, 4 cities, 9 restaurants, and 1 small little mason jar worth of trash. It was extraordinary. It was really, really uplifting. And so, when we were thinking about what we're going to do going forward with it, we thought, well, okay, great. We had 12 travelers this year, and what are we going to do next year? Are we going to do another trip, another 12 travelers? Are we going to keep the Yellowstone trip where we had the original 12 travelers and do that one again, and then do, add on to it? And really what we realize is we don't need 12 travelers doing zero waste perfectly every year. We need 12,000 doing it imperfectly. And I think that that's probably my message here with sustainability and planning your travel is like, you can do sustainability imperfectly when you travel. Like, don't go into it feeling that you have to be absolutely perfect. But the best tool at your disposal, or maybe not the best, but like the easiest tool at your disposal is to ask the people that you're working with, whomever you're giving your credit card to, just, it could be just anybody over the phone or an email, just slip it in the email and say, oh, by the way, what is your position on sustainability? And what this does is a few things. One is it shows them it's important, right? So all of a sudden, if that rep gets, 4 questions this week on sustainability, they're going to go report to their manager and be like, hey, I'm starting to get a lot of questions about this. Do we have one of these? Or like, can you draft up some text to me? And then that manager is like, wow, you're the 9th, person on the phones that told me about this. Like that, we must be getting a lot of these. And they talk to their executive team and so on and so forth, and their board of directors, and like, oh my gosh, sustainability is important. It's something we have to address and do something about. So that's great. Like that's like the worst case scenario. Even if they don't come back to you with an answer on what their position on sustainability is, at least you're telling them it's important in like the easiest possible way. I guess the best case scenario is that you start to then make your decisions on whom you give your money to based on, their sustainability merits, their score, kind of doing air quotes here. If you think one company is more sustainable than the other and they're kind of apples to apples on things, and maybe the one's a little bit more money, but it's more sustainable, or vice versa. Sometimes sustainability is actually the more cost conscious. That's kind of the way a lot of things are going, because you're saving on things. then you get to make those decisions, and you put money in the people, put money in the hands of people that are doing the things you want more of in the world. So I think that's a really, really great way to approach it. But more than anything, I just want to instill that mindset that, you're talking to a sustainability guy here, and like it's super tempting to say, you gotta do more, like let's keep on doing more, world. I don't think we need, individuals running themselves ragged. I just think we need everybody in the world doing a little something.
I like that. I just wrote this down. Put money in the hands of people who are doing the things you want more of in the world. That is a very easy sort of uh, mantra to have when you're booking trips and planning.
Mm-hmm.
So I should also mention that Tomorrow's Air has been very honored and delighted to have NatHab as a partner since the beginning, I think. So in addition to all the groundbreaking things like zero waste trips, you're also supporting innovative technologies like direct air capture and enhanced rock weathering and sustainable aviation fuel and biochar. So we're very grateful to you for that.
Well, and likewise, right back to you. I mean, that goes to the very note you just took down, is like we want to get money in the hands of the people that are doing things we want to see more of. And we want to see more direct air capture in the world. We want that to be the new carbon offset, right? I mean, that would be extraordinary. I think we would move mountains, I guess pun intended,
Mm,
with the lithifying and rock
mm,
weathering aspect
mm.
of direct air capture. We would truly move mountains if the volume of people doing offsets were also investing in direct air capture. It's an exciting future with possibilities, but yeah, we've all got to move in the right direction and invest our time and money and energy into those noble pursuits, those novel
Mm,
pursuits.
for sure. I also have to ask you some personal questions because we've got the professional court, but now I'm so curious about the personal court. Like, what are you like at home? Do you do the cooking? Do you and your wife have dance parties? I know you grow up in Florida, and I like resisting Florida man jokes with you because it doesn't seem quite fitting because you're not the Florida redneck that I think so many people have in mind. But tell me a little bit about your home life.
Well, I am wearing cutoff jean shorts as we speak, and I'm about to go wrestle some gators. No, so other than that, no, pretty boring around here. No, yeah. Oh goodness. Well, okay, my home life. So I mean, I do travel a lot. I travel, I don't know, maybe like a third of the year, which is of course super exciting. But when I'm home, yeah, I'm doing my own little nature adventures. I was in Colorado for a good number of years and got after all the nature and outdoors things there. I love to backpack, love to trail run and fly fish and hike 14ers and all that great stuff, be on the river. In Florida, I'm finding sort of surrogates for some of that stuff, being on kayaks and paddleboards around the mangroves and looking at jellyfish and wrestling gators. But yeah, you mentioned cooking. That is probably, honestly, of all my like non work related activities, like extracurriculars, probably my favorite thing to do. I really
Really?
truly love cooking. It's like I love music and I love playing music. But
What do you play?
I play a few string instruments. I grew up playing violin, but
Really?
switched. Yeah, for good. Like probably, I don't know, like 16 years. I think I played violin. It was a pretty big thing in my life. But then I picked up a guitar in college, and that's sort of my thing now. But I have a banjo, because I'm in Florida. I got to sit on the front porch and be picking
Right
and grinning.
on. You and Steve
Uh,
Martin.
yeah, no, I do love banjo, but no, I was gonna say, so like, even though like I do identify with music and like it's one of my big pastimes, cooking still supersedes that. And I love to cook anything, anything out there. Um, Love it when it turns into soup weather, which we're getting into right now in Florida, believe it or not. It was like 53 degrees this morning. It's fantastic.
Wow.
And yeah, I love the creativity. I love looking up recipes and amending them to how I think they ought to be. And I love looking in the pantry and coming up with a bunch of weird stuff and making it all work. Got a lot of my inspiration from the show Chopped. That's how I've learned it all. And yeah, no, it's a huge part of it. Dance parties, not so much. I'm not a big dancer, but I don't know, at the random wedding, I'll oftentimes come out of my shell.
Yeah, but if you're playing the music, Court, then you're
That's true.
safe because
Good point.
everybody else can dance and you're the key participant.
Excellent point.
Um, well, thank you for making time for this. I'm gonna see you shortly. We're gonna be at this conference in a couple weeks together, so we'll have more of Court Whelan to come.
I can't wait. It's going to be so fun. Well, thank you so much for having me on today, Christina.